Welcome. Today's video is going to be on consciousness from Unit 3, but this is going to focus on drugs. This is a very serious topic that I have to be careful with because I have way too much fun with everything, or I try to, and to think about the impact that drugs have and illegal drugs and substances have on people's lives is pretty difficult subject, and some of us it's impacted personally. So what I'm going to do today is kind of turn my camera off over here. We'll go full screen on this and flip through it. I think it'll be easier to read because I did a widescreen format on these notes. But let's flip through these and talk about it. This is an area that I believe we're seeing more and more questions on in the AP test, and for AP students especially, this is an area we might want to focus in on. But drugs in particular are important because they do impact and change our consciousness. Someone may be exhibiting strange symptoms or seem out of touch or not understanding what's going on around them, and drugs may be the reason for that. The other thing that may be happening is that there are drugs that impact psychological disorders and sometimes bring some comfort to people and help them deal with things. Now, I think it's a pretty crude way of attacking a problem, and it's probably not the only way to do that. Drugs alone probably aren't going to fix any issues, that's for sure. But we will see that come up again when we talk about treatments down the road, when we look at psychological disorders and abnormal behavior in the last couple of chapters. So let's look at it. This is Unit 3, and like I said, I'm going to pop it full screen here. So the pictures we're looking at here are of 6 individuals whose lives have been impacted in a massive way because of the choices that they've made to use drugs. And you can see it on their face. I mean, this is not the kind of thing that you want to have happen to you. And there's really 7 individuals. If you look at the person on the right there, the difference in their complexion, their facial tone, and some of these folks I'm sure were having some tough times even before this happened. But let's look at the impact of drugs on consciousness specifically. There are 4 main areas, or what they call PSYCH: the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And this is a way to be thinking about, what drugs can do to you and what can happen with the use of them. Psychoactive drugs specifically is one that will alter the perceptions and moods of a person. And so we talked last unit about sensation and perception. This unit we're discussing consciousness, and consciousness sometimes shows in someone's mood. You might be able to tell what they're thinking about and what kind of conscious thoughts are going through their head at that time. Psychoactive drugs make changes in the body-brain chemistry, and they break down the blood-brain barrier. This is also interesting with MS, because that's one of the ways that multiple sclerosis attacks the brain and central nervous system. Is your central nervous system and brain are infiltrated with autoimmune fighting antibodies, and what your body does to naturally fight infection. And what it does is, in the case of MS, the immune system will kind of cross over and do some things to itself, crossing through that blood-brain barrier. You have a situation with drugs where they can get through that. When you get through that and it gets into the mind and into the brain, it makes some serious changes. We have dependence and addiction issues for sure, because what happens with drugs are they not only change and alter your perceptions and your mood, but they can produce extreme feelings and changes, and a repeated exposure to a drug usually would lessen the drug's effects. And then it takes bigger and bigger doses to get the desired effect. So you have 2 things that develop with that: withdrawal and dependence. Withdrawal is when you stop taking a drug after you've been addicted, and users may experience undesirable effects or withdrawal. That could definitely happen with one of the drugs that I take that helps with my energy level. Not only will physically I'd feel a change in how I am able to go about the day, and I may not have as much energy with MS because of that, but the drug is one that is very powerful and very addictive. So I have to be very careful when I renew that every year. I have to go through a questionnaire with doctors and really discuss it. So withdrawal is a really serious factor, and for some people it boils over into a dependence issue, and sometimes that can lead to things like even just depression. But dependence is the absence of a drug, may then end up leading to feelings of physical pain, intense cravings. That's the physical dependence. And then the negative emotions or psychological dependence that people feel. So let's look at some misconceptions regarding addiction. It's a craving for a chemical substance despite the adverse effects. Drugs can quickly corrupt a person, and they cannot be overcome voluntarily once addiction sets in. It's no different than other types of behavior like gambling, addictions, food addictions, and for some people even internet addiction. Now, these images here are just meant to kind of bring that out some, and the image on the right, top right corner, is looking at the dose from small to large, and the side axis there is looking at the effect of the drug from small to very large at the top. The exposure at first, you might have a small dosage and it will have a decent effect, but that's just where our baseline is. After repeated exposure, you're going to need a bigger dosage to be able to get the same effect. And that makes some sense, and I think most people are familiar with that, but it's important to keep that in mind. So when I was a kid in the 80s, we had Nancy Reagan who said, just say no. And unfortunately, you guys, I guess, are just not saying no anymore, and there's a drug war, and we have all these problems with drugs. And I kid, because I care. It's a joke. We didn't just say no as a culture with Nancy Reagan. It's easy maybe individually to do that. As a collective country and a collective group of people, it's harder. I also feature on this slide the group called MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, and they have saved hundreds of thousands of lives due to their ongoing campaign to fight drug abuse and drug addiction. The Red Ribbon campaigns are a big part of that. So we're going to look at different types of drugs. There's a few different main categories, and then we'll look at the ones that fall under that. Like depressants are drugs that reduce the neural activity and slow body functions. Alcohol is one of those, so are barbiturates, and so are opiates. So alcohol. In low doses, it would relax a drinker by slowing down the sympathetic nervous system and lowering inhibitions and judgments. What's very interesting for men is you will have issues of aggression in some people because their inhibitions are lowered, and then you would get what you would consider to be potentially a stimulant type effect where they're going to act out and be aggressive. Now that does not show potentially up here on the screen on consequences of alcohol, but it does show in a way where it says reduced inhibitions, especially when this man has a star in his eye. And I want you to consider that, especially young ladies. Our colleges and universities are absolutely drenched in alcohol, and you've got to be careful when you are being a social young adult and going to these types of parties. A person that you've met, a boy especially, a young man who seems very rational and a very good kid, he has a few drinks in his system and he can change really quickly. And young men, I guess that can happen with women as well. But it's more prevalent with men. And in high doses, your reaction's going to slow, your speech will slur, and skilled performance is definitely going to deteriorate. It affects memory by disrupting the processing of recent events into long-term memory. It reduces self-awareness and focuses one's attention on immediate situations rather than future consequences. And you can even see that with somebody who's sort of drunk. They're constantly talking about what's happening in front of them. Oh my gosh, did you see that? Did you see that? Did you see that? I mean, it's just like they're not able to kind of put a filter up on what in the world's coming out of their mouth. But how does the body actually react to alcohol? Generally, it takes about an hour to metabolize the drink. Women metabolize it much more slowly than men, and that's another reason that men will, with the same amount, get drunk faster. I might have said that wrong. Men with the same amount would, let me reread it here. If a woman and a man of the same weight consume the same amount of alcohol, the woman would be more intoxicated due to the way the bodies are composed. Okay? But women are going to metabolize that alcohol more slowly. Men have more muscle, which speeds up the metabolizing of the alcohol. So it's kind of interesting. With a man, the reactions are just different. And I'm not saying that men have more muscle in every case, because there could be some very strong young ladies out there, but in most cases it's true. Let's look at a scan of a woman with alcoholism and a scan of a woman without alcoholism. So there's two scans here. The one on the left at the top, the black scans, you see the large gap in the center where the ventricles are, and you're just seeing atrophy of the brain, really. In the bottom, the same is the case for the 43-year-old alcoholic on the right, compared to a 43-year-old normal person. Alcohol in adults, and for adults, it's going to impair your judgment, and your motor skills are going to be impaired. For younger people, their judgment is impaired, and they're already having problems with judgment just because their brain's not completely developed, and we've discussed that. They're going to have a huge jump in this fact of fewer inhibitions. And their motor skills are not going to be impaired as much. And I said a huge jump in inhibitions, and I mean they'll have fewer inhibitions. So make sure you understand what I'm saying there. But let's look at some more depressants. These are drugs that reduce neuroactivity and slow down the body. We said alcohol was one, barbiturates is another, and so are opiates. What are barbiturates? Well, they're drugs that mimic the effects of alcohol. They depress the CNS, the central nervous system activity, and in larger doses they can lead to impaired memory and judgment. So a good example of this is some of the classic cases of Hollywood folks who have unfortunately passed before their time. And they've done that because what's happened with them, I'm going to make the window for me just a little bit smaller and I'll widen this out. I'm still playing around with this a little bit. So at least you get a sense of what I'm saying, and maybe you can read my facial expressions at least a little bit, because sometimes I think that's a problem when you can't see the person who's talking. Maybe you're not quite focused in on what I'm trying to say. But I do want you to see the graphics here because I think they're pretty good. In fact, I'm going to open it wide open again just to be sure you can read it better. But it says barbiturates, the danger of abusing them. What are they? They're depressants to slow down the body. So we've got these celebrities here who have died from overdose. Judy Garland from The Wizard of Oz. Marilyn Monroe, of course. If you take enough of these, it's going to slow your body down so much that you would die. Same with like alcohol poisoning, and do the same kind of thing. What are they actually using barbiturates for? Sometimes for anxiety disorders, for insomnia, epilepsy, general anesthesia, because you'd be able to lower someone's central nervous system and make them unconscious, or at least below their conscious level. That we've talked about consciousness before. It's hard to say unconscious, but for capital punishment, this is how they do it, sadly. But at the top middle there it says, why are they abused? They're abused because the feelings of intoxication and contentment, the relaxation and the euphoria and loss of inhibitions. This gives someone a feeling like they are going to be fine. It makes them feel really good. And that can be extremely addicting. 20% of U.S. children grow up with a barbiturate abuser in their household. That's a huge number, 2 of 10. And what are the risks? Well, all kinds of respiratory issues, and because you're depressing the system, drowsiness, slurred speech, lack of voluntary coordination, eye twitching, physical and psychological dependence. They only take about 40 minutes to get started working on your system. And that's not very long at all. Some examples of these drugs are shown there. Nubital, seconal and amytal. So those talls at the end are usually going to tip you off that those are drugs that might be barbiturates. Depressants, again, they slow your neural activity. And we've got alcohol, barbiturates, and opiates. For our test in class and for our purposes, I would definitely know how to classify these drugs. Like, what is alcohol? It's a depressant. What is barbiturate? It's a depressant. What is an opiate? It's a depressant. So make sure that you're kind of clued in on that. So let's look at the next one here, of course, opiates. And opium and its derivatives of morphine and heroin depress neural activity. They temporarily lessen pain, and they're highly addictive. I mean, I can't even get into this because I would not ever want to know how addictive heroin is. But it is one of those things when I was growing up that heroin and the other drug of choice, opiates for some people, and we'll get to that in a minute here. Let me pull this back. I went a little bit too far. But heroin is something that will give someone these short 3 to 5 hour bursts of feelings, great feelings, but they're followed by huge cravings for another fix, and this progressively gets larger and larger, massive physical withdrawal symptoms. That's why it's so greatly addictive. And they use methadone to treat that, and methadone doesn't have the same addictive qualities, but you can still get addicted to it. It doesn't have the same physical intense cravings, but you get the same sort of high from it, so it's helping people kind of ease off of heroin. And you see at the top there the needles. I mean, you've got a situation where you're most likely injecting it, and boy, that's just that's not a way to live. I have to inject myself every day for a drug with MS that I take to try to help prevent relapses and keep me in a state of remission, although it doesn't work very well all the time, sadly, like today. But what I can tell you is I can't imagine living my life where you're living your life at the end of a needle like that. Let me just make this a little bit bigger here. I mean, and this way you'll see it a little bit better. I'm messing around with this while I'm planning it, so I'm sorry about that. I didn't plan on doing the video in this format with a widescreen, and I just started it to mess around with it, and then I just kept it. So sorry about that if it's a little bit different. Anyway, hopefully you can see the screen well and you can read it okay. And if you can't read the notes well ever, like this part right here where it says prescription stimulants and cocaine act in the same part of the brain, if you can't read that stuff, go to the website, pull up the notes on your laptop, your computer, your tablet, your phone, whatever you need to do, and you'll be able to read it better on there. Anyway, here's a category that we're probably very familiar with. I do have a few students who have never had any caffeine. There are religious reasons for some. I know Mormons try not to use caffeine, and they have a strong stance against drugs and alcohol. But drugs that excite the neural activity and speed up bodily functions are ones that are called stimulants. And this morning, Mrs. Duez ran out and got this for me before we went to a quick meeting with my son's teacher down the street at his elementary school. And the McCafe was needed this morning. I mean, I had trouble just getting out of bed. So, and I had trouble holding the cup today too when it was full. It's easier when it's not as full. But a stimulant like caffeine can produce effects to kind of jolt you and get you going in the morning. And that's how most people use it. Nicotine, though, I'm kind of pairing up with this because it's very similar. The same kinds of impacts on your body. Caffeine and nicotine increase the heart and the breathing rates and other autonomic functions to provide energy. Functions you don't have much control over, so this gives it a boost. Caffeine's found in tea and coffee and soda and chocolate and many other over-the-counter medications. Some of you guys have had the opportunity to take AP World History with me. If you were with me last year or the year before, I think the first year we taught it here, they didn't do the book 6 Glasses, A History of the World in 6 Glasses by Tom Standage, but that gives a sense of knowing more about caffeine and coffee and tea and the historical impact of them. But they're extremely impactful in world history when people stopped drinking alcohol, and they used that for a lot of reasons, mostly to mostly for taste, to alleviate boredom of drinking water. But when they went to drinking alcohol, and mostly beer and wine, it helped to purify the drinking supply, because it could easily be contaminated. It didn't have, drinking water plants like we have today. So caffeine comes into play around the time of the Enlightenment and this scientific revolution, and many people think that it's not a coincidence. It just happens to be, it's not just happening to be that people were hanging out and drinking coffee and tea, but those drinks, that caffeine, helped to spark that revolution of thought and this huge evolution of people looking at the world a little bit differently than they had before in all kinds of different areas. So you can read through that if you want. I mean, there's not going to be that much on the test as far as that's concerned, but it is physically addictive, caffeine, but not terribly addictive. And you can break a caffeine addiction over a few weeks without much issue or problem. The problem is really that most people don't want to, because it's not, you don't have the kind of side effects you have with these other drugs. You do have to be careful though, because people can get over caffeinated. That can spur on headaches, but interestingly enough, if you're getting a headache, you don't have access to a drug to help the pain, and you really need to function without having a headache. Sometimes caffeine can help, but if you're over caffeinated, that might be causing it. Anyway, this is an interesting slide. I'm not really going to get into the whole thing, but I just wanted you to see some different spots here where caffeine is included in some products that you might be surprised by. One of those being this thing called shock soap. And one shower lathering up with this special kind of soap that has caffeine in it would give you about 200 milligrams of a caffeine boost, and if you look at that, that's about having an 8-ounce cup of coffee. That's a pretty good jolt of caffeine. Let's look at some more stimulants and what they do. Caffeine and nicotine are going to increase the heart rate and breathing rates of a person. And how does this happen? Well, we've got the synapse there. We looked at this in Unit 2, where the two neurons are communicating. The presynaptic neuron releases a neurotransmitter that binds to receptors on the postsynaptic cell. This allows signals to be transmitted from the neuron to neuron in the brain, and drugs come into play when they either stop and inhibit that process or activate or get that process to increase. So how does caffeine and nicotine work? They increase the heart and breathing rates and the autonomic functions to provide energy. Nicotine is leading to bursts of receptor activity, and it leads to increased release of acetylcholine from the neurons, calling your body and brain into action. This is a wake-up call that many smokers feel when they re-energize and take a smoke break, as they do. And I used to work with guys downtown. They'd go downstairs and have a smoke break like 3-4 times a day. The non-smoke breakers would usually go, what the heck, I'm up here doing all this work, and they're downstairs taking a smoke break. And I know some people who started smoking, I think, just so they could take breaks, because it was sort of understood that's what smokers did. Nicotine can improve your reaction time and your ability to pay attention, and it makes you feel like you can work better and faster. It increases the level of neurotransmitters and chemicals that modulate how your brain works. So endorphins are produced as well, which can lead to feelings of euphoria. You've got this endorphin rush, and some people talk about that with like long distance running, if you've run cross country. And you know my joke about cross country runners, it's amazing. They're amazing athletes if you think about it. You know, a lot of those kids come to school and they start running 5-6 o'clock in the morning before the sun comes up. They run across country, all the way across country, and then they come back for first period. They're amazing. Amazing people. I don't know how they do it. I think they take a train. Honestly, I'm not really sure what's going on here. That's a joke. This outpouring of chemicals gives you a mental edge to finish a race, temporarily masking the nagging pains you might otherwise feel. So a runner might sometimes feel that endorphin rush, and it can last for a while, and it can make you feel really good. If you ever really felt good after a good workout, that's probably part of it. Now, stimulants excite the neuroactivity and speed up body functions, and nicotine is in cigarettes. Why do people smoke? That's a great question. Some of it's marketing and has been for years. Some of it is social, but it is nicotine more than anything. And sometimes it's a taste of the smoke, I guess, although, I can't imagine. It is socially rewarding. As I mentioned, if you want to go on a coffee break, or, coffee break's another thing people will do, and I did plenty of those when I worked downtown. But if you go outside and you smoke a cigarette, you're outside in the sunshine and you're sitting there talking with people, and it's kind of a bonding experience. Do you have a lighter? Do you have a cigarette? So I get that part of it, but as a younger person, it can be socially rewarding because you look at other people and you may think that they're cool or awesome or different because they're smoking, and certainly they're not. If you look at the picture at the bottom, that's the picture of somebody who was a smoker on the right hand side. On the left hand side is a healthy set of lungs. My mother smoked for a long time growing up, and I was so angry with her about always smoking. And I'd get in the car to go on a date or something, or have to take my friend somewhere, and I was driving. This is when I was older. I didn't drive for a while, mostly because of this reason. But the car smelled like smoke so bad, I didn't want anybody to be in there. And I wonder about how much secondhand smoke I've ingested, which is not good for you. Nicotine takes away unpleasant cravings, so it's a negative reinforcement. We're going to talk more about that in the next video. It triggers epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, endorphins, all these chemical reactions happening in your brain. Nicotine itself is rewarding as a positive reinforcement because you are getting stimulated by smoking, and so you're going to want to keep doing that because it makes you feel better. It boosts your system. So nicotine kills nearly 5 million people each year. We have about 1.3 billion people worldwide who smoke, and it delivers a hit of nicotine within 7 seconds. So let's look at some other stimulants, drugs that excite neuroactivity and speed up the body. This one is one you do not want to mess with, that's for sure, and it's called cocaine. You may be also familiar with cocaine in the form of the, like they call it rock cocaine type of crack cocaine that was really popular in the inner city whenever I was a kid. So illegal stimulant derived from a cocoa tree is what we're talking about. Derivatives are also Novocaine, which are used in anesthetics even today. If you go to the doctor and you get a shot of Novocaine, that's partially some derivative of cocaine. That's why it's so powerful. And your tongue's like in your mouth because it is really pretty powerful stuff. It was originally part of Coca-Cola's formula. You may remember that from 6 Glasses if you read that in world history. Yet coca leaves with cocaine were extracted for medical purposes and still used today in some flavoring of drinks. So Coca-Cola had a little bit of cocaine in it at first. Now they took that away, but it still has this, comes from the same general situation. So it's inhaled or snorted, which reaches the brain pretty much immediately. It's going straight up into the brain through the nose. Produces intense euphoria, mental alertness. It speeds up it's a stimulant. Massive self-confidence, and it typically lasts for several minutes, about 10 to 30 minutes if you're a binge user. And remember, if you're a binge user, it's going to be something you're going to run through pretty quickly and then want more and more. Cocaine is going to block the reuptake of dopamine. The brain is flooded with dopamine, and it produces pleasureful sensations. That's why people want to continue to do this very destructive behavior. Other types of stimulants are things like ecstasy. Ecstasy is a drug that I hope you're not aware of because it is a popular drug in clubs. If you have ever used ecstasy, you may have thought, oh, that was neat, that was cool, but you may not realize the very dangerous impact it could have on you, and it has led to death of some teenage persons or young people. It's a stimulant and a mild hallucinogen. So it could maybe be categorized as a hallucinogen. Definitely could be, depending on how it's mixed and put together. It increases empathy. You feel this great outpouring of emotion for other people. You have a peaceful feeling, and the person feels calm and relaxed, yet they are not calm or relaxed. They have a huge supply of energy. This is a popular club drug, and it is popular for another reason. These people who market this to young people are sinister and evil, and they make it look like candy. This is not candy, it is a drug, and it can be very, very dangerous. What it can do is dehydrate you, and if it dehydrates you and you're not aware of that and you're dancing, This could cause a person to have severe overheating, increase their blood pressure, and even cause death, because those are the types of things you don't want your body to do. It declines in memory performance on IQ tests. This is long-term memory performance, not just short-term. And we'll show you a graphic of that in the next slide. They believe that MDMA, which is what ecstasy is called, can cause long-term serotonin changes in the brain, and that leads to reduced serotonin levels. And we've talked about consciousness and the daily circadian rhythm, and the serotonin and serotonin levels are really important with that. And the increased risk of depressed mood. So let's look at the next slide here. This gives you a sense of it. Excuse me. On the left side, you'll see, and I'll use the arrow over here, you've got a normal receptor, and then you've got the elevated mood during ecstasy, and you can see how it is rather increased. And then after ecstasy, it goes in the opposite direction. It moves to a depressed-like feelings, and it's kind of an irritable situation for the person. They don't really understand why they're feeling so bad. The ecstasy has been found to cause permanent memory problems for people, so keep it in mind. Let's look at some stimulants that are extremely addictive and definitely a problem. Amphetamines, speed or uppers, suppress appetite and were once prescribed as diet pills. Not prescribed any longer because the tolerance to the appetite that the suppression helps to produce occurs very quickly, meaning that the individual has to keep having more and more of the drug, and it's highly addictive. It also increases concentration, reduces fatigue, and can lead to anxiety and irritability. Methamphetamines is not something to mess with, and this is also known as crystal meth, made popular by the TV show that had just finished airing here called Breaking Bad. Although that may be a well-written television show, and I've never watched even one episode, I just never had the opportunity to. I'm sure I would probably like it for the same reasons everybody else does. It's really well-written, but I'm not really a person that enjoys the drug culture or would be able to relate to it much. I've never done drugs. I've never had alcohol. I have never smoked cigarettes or marijuana, and for me, it's just a choice I've made not to do these things to be a healthier person, a more productive person. But maybe people relate to that in some small way because of their experiments with different substances. I have no idea, but this is not something to mess with. The person at the top of the screen here began having these issues when she was 30. By 38, she was dead. And it has a massive impact on our culture and people, and it's been sort of like the crack cocaine of the last 10-year period. Like when I was a kid, crack was a major killer on city streets. Today, this metamorphosis that's happened has been really, really a bad one. So what is it and how does this work? It's a legal drug that's manufactured in street labs. It's either smoked or injected. As with all amphetamines, after using for a while, somebody would crash and then exhibit withdrawal symptoms of deep fatigue. People might sleep for like 5 straight freaking days. It's like crazy what people have done on this stuff. They suffer from intense mental depression and an increased appetite. This is incredibly addictive, and over time it appears to reduce the baseline dopamine levels. It causes massive changes to the brain, as you can see on the left. And over time, it reduces the baseline dopamine levels and leaves users with permanently depressed functioning. Let's look at hallucinogens. Now, these are psychedelics, otherwise known as psychedelics, mind-manifesting drugs that distort perception and evoke sensory images in the absence of sensory input, meaning there's nothing to see and you see things. LSD is also known as lysergic acid diethylamide, and my voice is not doing so well today, especially when I'm trying to pronounce something I'm not good at pronouncing. But it's also known as acid. It's one of the most powerful drugs known. It only takes 1/1,000,000th of an ounce to produce mind-altering effects. It was first synthesized from rye fungus by a Swiss chemist in the late 1930s. Hoffman was his name, and he accidentally ingested a little bit of this substance, and it can cause you severe issues. Trips can last from 6 to 14 hours, varying in great length. It can distort visual perceptions and produce hallucinations. These emotions are very intense and unstable, and it impairs thought. A bad trip, quote unquote, can cause a person to suffer a state of panic, to feel like they've gone crazy or mad, and then they will never return to normal. Some have ended tragically their lives in accidents, deaths, or suicides. The flashback is really crazy, that some of this LSD is stored in your spinal column, in the synapses there, and it can reoccur at any time and give you the same effects. Marijuana and LSD, not very physically addictive, but highly psychologically addictive. So these drugs are to be avoided. So let's look at hallucinogens in the category of marijuana. Psychedelic, mind-manifesting drugs distort perceptions and evoke sensory images in the absence of sensory input. Let's just pull it all up here and we'll talk through it. First things first, I want to say this, that we are studying these drugs so that we can understand how they can alter someone's perceptions like a hallucinogen can. How do they alter someone's consciousness? Both hallucinogens, LSD and marijuana, can change someone's brain chemistry for life, very seriously altering the way they look at the world and how they function. It's not a good situation. I'm going to take a quick break here. I'll come back and cut part 2 of this. My son just come home and I want to check in and see how he's doing, and then we'll finish it up. So I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. Let's get back after this now. As I was saying about hallucinogens, they can produce feelings of elation and promote relaxation. Marijuana can. It relieves inhibitions, relieves anxiety, and it can increase sensitivity to sounds and sights and touch. It can cause a sense of time distortion. THC is the active chemical in it, and its ingredients produce the high that a person would feel. And it remains in the body for a long time. For 7 weeks, at least 10% of it remains in your system. The effects can be that it impairs your attention and coordination, slows down your reaction time. It interferes with your concentration, logical thinking slows. So this is not a good thing, especially for young people, to have this kind of effect happening to you when your brain is already developing on its own the way it is. It interferes with concentration, logical thinking slows, difficulty forming new memories, inability to hold in your mind what was said, chronic use associated with loss of motivation and general apathy, and it causes respiratory damage faster than cigarettes does. And you can really consider that because there's not a filter on like the cigarette has to keep out some of the harmful parts of what you are smoking into your lungs. Now, there are some potential therapeutic uses of medical marijuana. It is legalized in some states, and it is being pushed in the legislature and others. There are some people who believe that the benefits of marijuana for some, if you've been injured, you have a disease, multiple sclerosis, as you can see, is one of the ones that's on our list here. Obviously, if I was ever severely advanced with my disease, this is something I might consider. But I would never, ever consider it in the state of Texas unless the law changes. You do not want to mess with the law when it comes to drugs and alcohol. They don't have much pity for you. The law is the law. Now, there are states where medical marijuana or legalized or decriminalized purchase of marijuana is okay, but there's really not any state where they allow you to have as much of it as you want, or to grow it or produce it or whatever. Here's a good chart that shows you sort of the felony map of it, and it shows you that Texas, of course, being in red, pretty serious. Some of them are in red, which is interesting, or an orange kind of color, but they also have a green box around it. The green box around it means that it's been decriminalized, but only 1 ounce would not be a crime. So it's an interesting breakdown here. There are national laws on marijuana, but some of these local laws have kind of overrode those. But the state of California is very interesting. I mean, it's just kind of a mess. People really aren't sure what's going on with that. I'll be back in just a moment. Okay, I'm back. I didn't want my dog swallowing a balloon, so we got that taken care of. We talk about needing drugs. Griff might need some drugs to get that out of his system. Anyway, marijuana has been sort of socially and governmentally at odds, and our government's not been very happy about the potential gateway effect. And you see the sign or little handout there on the bottom right corner. In 1945, this is the Narcotic Education Foundation of America, which in some ways they've over-dramatized the effects of marijuana, but still there are serious effects, and it's not like you can go completely in the other direction and say that because for some very sick and ill people that is shown that it could help them in some ways, doesn't mean that it's okay for everybody to use this drug. And to decriminalize it is one thing, but to almost champion its use, I think, is dangerous. So, drugs and alcohol, there's the whole list here for you, all the depressants and stimulants, and marijuana is a mild hallucinogen. It's not like LSD, but it enhances your sensations, relieves pain. It can distort time, and it can relax people. There are MS patients who take it and they don't smoke it. Not many people smoke it. They ingest it, and when you do ingest it, you have the same it has the same impact on you, maybe not as quickly. I don't know. I really don't know. I've never used it and don't plan to, but the people who I know who have MS that suffer from leg tremors or suffer from not being able to sleep because their symptoms are so bad, or have very, very bad chronic fatigue. Like they can't work, they can't go anywhere. And none of these folks that I know are from Texas. So it's important to understand and realize that, it's not something that you should be doing, first of all, as a younger person, ever. And if you were ever going to do something like use any drug, really, it should be under a doctor's care, and I would think under a doctor's prescription, so that they can check your system and make sure that you're not going to be falling prey to the addictive qualities of it. Is marijuana addictive? I think anything can be addictive. Too much of anything is a bad problem. Is it as addictive as heroin or methamphetamine? No. However, just because something is not as bad as they used to play it out to be doesn't mean that it's something we should be all doing or using. And be very, very careful when presented with this drug. It's a drug, and you can never be sure. And I'm just saying this because some students are going to try to use it, whether it's in college or high school or whatever. You do not know where it's coming from. It's not manufactured in a safe way. It's not put together in a safe way. And potentially it can be laced with all kinds of things that could do terrible harm to you. LSD as being one of them. Let's look at the last couple slides here. The biological, psychological, and social cultural influences of drug use. These three areas kind of combine to make this cultural issue. We've had several wars on drugs that have been unsuccessful, but biologically, there is an addictive gene and sets of genes that can give someone a tendency for addiction, but also for needing a higher amount of the drug for the same impact. One of the reasons I don't drink alcohol is because I had two grandfathers, both my biological grandfathers, were basically alcoholics. My one grandfather I never met because he was such a drunk and alcoholic, and he died of liver disease. My other grandfather drank too much. He drank a lot. He drank every day, and I would consider that to be alcoholic tendency. Do I have a gene that would make me addicted or prone to addiction? Maybe that's part of the reason I never drank, because I might feel that natural urge. As I've joked about this before, I am kind of a perfectionist. I like to do things right, and I don't think there's a right way to do drinking. Like, you can't do it well. I'm going to do it so much that I'm going to be good at it. There's not a way to do that. So physiologically, stress, additional psychological disorders can bring about the need to medicate through drugs in an attempt to reduce the impact. We will talk much more about that going down in the future, but they can have a very addictive quality as well. Sociocultural perspective is the availability of drugs. That's a very big problem, especially in more urban or suburban environments, and the higher the population, the greater the influence and the availability of the drugs. So peer pressure and impact of friends can be really difficult, probably the most difficult. Taking it from somebody who survived 4 years of college without taking a drink of alcohol, it can be a very difficult thing socially. My friendship circles definitely shrank because of it, but I feel better about myself because I was able to stay strong and stick to what I wanted to do, which is not go down that road. And it's one I couldn't really afford to go anyway. Last slide I wanted to look at here is on the left. You see some of the qualities of what drugs are going to potentially do, and increased levels of dopamine or activating changes. Genes trigger production of proteins. You've got all along the road there these different Krebs activations and specific genes are being activated. But looking at the map there of the United States, you've got, and this is a good one to kind of pull it up full screen, and I will do that here so you can see it better. But you've got, and I'm going to go all the way full screen. You've got Xanax, Lexapro, Activin, Zoloft, Prozac. These are different drugs. I'm not going to read them all the way across the top, but when you see an A under Xanax, that's for anxiety. A D is for depression. B is bipolar. F, fibromyalgia, which I find interesting because it may be thought of as a psychiatric drug, but it seems like people have real physical pain with fibromyalgia, but it's still being determined. Obsessive compulsive disorder, panic, and post-traumatic stress disorder. The pills are kind of laid out there in a way to represent the total drug use by prescription. And prescription pills, each one of the pills shown on the screen is 1 million prescriptions itself. We spend $4.5 billion a year, and that's in 2009, on pharmaceutical ads alone, and they are infiltrating our television screens. And in the bottom picture there that shows the capsule with the main street of American Town right there being reflected in it, I think this is a good example here of what the issue is. It's just very, very common. What kids are doing these days are rating parents pills in their bathroom and stealing a few pills at a time. This is something that parents have to be very aware of and make sure that this doesn't happen, because it'd be very, very dangerous to take prescription medicine, and it's also very illegal. And we are a nation sort of addicted to the medical community giving out drugs the way that they do. And I think, for one, and I'll pull the screen back here a little bit and finish up here with you, I think, for one, it's a very serious issue, but it's one that we can personally be responsible for, but it's very difficult to have a sense of like a wide community of the entire country and be able to do much about that. It has to be kind of coming from your own family, your own perspective, and staying safe and making good choices about drugs. So again, remember why we're doing this. We're looking at the changes in consciousness that you would experience, or a patient or a person would experience while taking drugs. And remember also the very serious nature of this. On the test, I would focus on categorizing each one of the drugs and putting them in their overall category, whether it be stimulant, depressant, or hallucinogen, for example, and understand the chemical nature of the neuron and how the drug is actually working in the brain and central nervous system. So until next time, next time we'll look some more at Unit 3, which for us also includes learning, classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Until next time, don't forget to be awesome.